It was supposed to be a quiet drive home. The kind of drive where your only company is the hum of the engine and the occasional flicker of the headlights through the fog. A long stretch of empty road, where the world feels like it's holding its breath, waiting for something. I didn't think anything of it when I pulled out onto the highway, heading down that desolate stretch, miles away from any town. It had been a long day, and I just wanted to get back. But the road, dark and winding, felt different tonight. The fog was thick, choking out the sky, and the trees along the sides of the road seemed to press in closer with every mile. The landscape was unfamiliar, like I had driven this route 100 times before, but now it was all twisted, distorted. I couldn't quite place it, but the air seemed wrong. A strange weight hung over me, making the drive feel longer than it should have been. And then I saw him. A figure standing by the side of the road, just beyond the edge of my headlight's reach. His thumb was out, and he was wearing a dark hood, his face hidden in the shadows. The fog swallowed him whole, making it impossible to see any details, but there was something about him, something that felt off. I should have kept driving. I should have ignored the figure standing there, alone in the fog. But something about him drew me in, like a moth to a flame. There was a hollow emptiness in the way he stood, something unsettling in the quiet stillness. I slowed the car, barely registering what I was doing. The headlights washed over him, and I saw that he was soaked, his clothes drenched in what looked like rain, but the sky had been clear when I started the drive. He was shivering slightly, his hood pulled low, but his eyes seemed unfocused, distant. I rolled down my window, just enough to hear him. "You need a ride?" I asked, trying to mask the unease creeping up my spine. He didn't say anything for a moment, and I wondered if he hadn't heard me. But then he nodded, slowly, his head tilted just slightly to the side. The movement was unnerving in its slowness, like his body was stiff with some unspoken tension. "Sure. Thanks," he said in a soft, raspy voice, as though he hadn't spoken in days. I hesitated. There was a gut feeling deep inside telling me to keep driving. But I had driven 100 miles that night, and it seemed like the decent thing to do. I unlocked the door and pushed it open, waiting for him to climb in. The moment he stepped into the car, the temperature dropped. A cold rush swept through the space between us, and I shivered involuntarily. "Where are you headed?" I asked, trying to fill the silence, keep my mind occupied. "Just down the road," he answered, his voice hollow, distant. His words seemed like they were reaching me from far away, muffled, as though they weren't quite coming from him. I didn't press further. He was probably just a traveler, stuck on a long, lonely stretch of road like me. But as I began to drive again, I couldn't help but glance over at him. His clothes, his jacket, was dark, the fabric drenched in patches of crimson red. Blood. My heart skipped a beat. The stains were too vivid, too unmistakable. I tried not to focus on it. Maybe it was some sort of accident, something that happened before he ended up here. Still, the thought of blood, real blood, poured on his jacket made my skin crawl. The road stretched on, the car's tires hissing against the wet pavement, and the fog thickened even more. It seemed to press against the windows like a living thing, creeping in to suffocate us both. I stole another glance at him, trying to avoid the unease building in my chest. He was staring straight ahead, his face half hidden in the shadow of the hood. His hands rested calmly in his lap, fingers loose, but the longer I looked at him, the more I felt like something was wrong. Something didn't fit. I glanced at him in the rearview mirror, and for a split second, just a fleeting moment, I thought I saw something. His reflection wasn't matching his movements. His hands, which were still resting on his lap, were moving in the mirror, twitching, fidgeting as if he couldn't sit still. I blinked. The movement stopped. The reflection was back to normal, matching him exactly. I rubbed my eyes, shook my head. I was just tired. Maybe the fog was playing tricks on me. But then there was the reflection again. His face had changed. The way his lips twisted, like a smirk, but unnatural, like it didn't belong. It wasn't him. I swallowed hard, focusing on the road. I didn't dare glance at the mirror again, the tight knot in my chest growing with each passing second. Where exactly are we going? I asked, my voice sounding too loud in the silence. He didn't respond. But the way his shoulders shifted in the seat, the way his fingers twitched, there was something strange about him, something that felt unnatural. It was as though his presence was something otherworldly, like he didn't quite belong to this world. The road ahead grew darker, the fog thickening to the point where I could barely see beyond the headlights. The atmosphere in the car grew colder, the air suffocating. Where are we going? I asked again, my voice almost desperate now. His eyes finally met mine, and for the first time, I saw his face clearly. His skin was pale, almost sickly, and his eyes were black, no pupils, no whites. Just endless, vacant darkness. His lips parted in that twisted, unnatural smile. Asterisk, you're almost there, asterisk. I slammed my foot on the gas pedal, but the car didn't speed up. The road was warping, bending and twisting unnaturally, the scenery around us blurring, stretching like a painting gone wrong. I could feel my heart pounding in my throat, the air thick with dread. My hands were shaking, but I couldn't stop myself from staring at him. His fingers twitched again, this time curling into claws, the jagged nails scraping against the fabric of his jacket. The road stretched out endlessly, no signs, no other cars, just the fog and the eerie silence between us. This was not a ride. Suddenly, the car's lights flickered. The engine sputtered, like it was choking, and I felt it, he was pulling me deeper, dragging me into the fog. Stop the car, the hitchhiker's voice came again, sharper this time, his tone commanding, like a master ordering a servant. But I couldn't stop. The car wouldn't stop. It was moving on its own, drawn by an unseen force, the road warping further and further. Where are we going? I choked out, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Just a little farther, he murmured, his lips twisting into that grotesque smile. You're almost home, The fog was closing in, thick and suffocating, the road twisting in impossible angles. There was no escape. I could feel it in my bones. His reflection in the mirror was no longer human. His face melted, shifting into something monstrous. His eyes were wide, black, empty pits, and his smile grew, stretching too wide, far too wide, I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The car lurched forward, and then, there was nothing. Just the fog. And the endless road ahead. I don't know how much time passed after that. It could have been seconds, or hours. The car kept moving, the engine now a low, constant hum beneath the terrifying stillness. But something was different. I could no longer feel the seat beneath me, or the weight of the steering wheel in my hands. The air was freezing, but I couldn't shiver. The fog surrounded me, now a suffocating blanket, pressing in on all sides, as though the very world was closing off. It was as if I had been pulled into another realm, a place where time and space didn't matter anymore. My body was numb, my mind too foggy to think. I glanced at the hitchhiker. He was still sitting beside me, his presence filling the car with a heavy, unshakable pressure. His face, his twisted, dark face, was closer now, closer than ever before, inches from my own. His black eyes locked onto mine, his smile stretching impossibly wide. And then I understood. This wasn't a ride. I hadn't been picked up by some ordinary hitchhiker. This wasn't some man lost in the fog. He wasn't even human. He was something else. Something ancient, something evil. And now, I was trapped in his world, trapped in his game. The car continued down the road, though I no longer recognized it. There were no more trees, no more signs, no more landmarks. Just the same endless stretch of fog that seemed to stretch forever. The headlights flickered, casting long, eerie shadows on the road ahead. Then, I heard it, the whisper. A soft hiss that slithered into my mind, the voice echoing all around me. Asterisk, you're almost home. Asterisk. But I knew it wasn't true. I wasn't going home. There was no home anymore. There was only this endless road and the hitchhiker beside me. The whisper grew louder, 1,000 voices speaking in unison. Asterisk, you're one of us now. Asterisk. The car lurched again, this time with a jarring force that sent me crashing forward against the wheel. I tried to scream, but my voice was lost, swallowed by the dark, the fog, the dread. I felt myself being pulled towards something cold, something far worse than the fear that gripped me. The world around me began to distort, bending at impossible angles. The road stretched infinitely ahead, the edges of reality itself starting to fray. I couldn't escape. There was nowhere left to go. The hitchhiker's twisted smile was the last thing I saw, his eyes black holes that swallowed everything, and then, the fog closed in. And I was gone. Asterisk, the road never ends. The hitchhiker waits, asterisk. I had been on the road for hours, the hum of the engine lulling me into a trance as I drove through the winding mountain pass. The sun had long since set, and the only light came from the faint glow of my headlights cutting through the thickening darkness. My eyes were heavy, the fatigue weighing on me like an anchor, but I pressed on. The next town wasn't far, I thought. I just had to keep going. But as the road twisted up into the mountains, I felt an unsettling sense of déjà vu. The turns were sharp and unpredictable, the edges of the road steep and unforgiving. I couldn't recall exactly when I had seen this stretch of road before, but something felt off. The road seemed to go on forever, curving back on itself in ways that didn't make sense. I shook my head, trying to push the creeping feeling of unease to the back of my mind. Little did I know, I was already trapped. The first time it happened, I thought I was just exhausted, maybe even hallucinating. I came around a bend and saw the same stretch of road I'd just passed. The trees, the sharp curve, the shadowy rocks, everything looked identical. I frowned, slowing down, squinting at the unfamiliar sight. I hadn't seen any signs for a detour or a junction, and yet, here I was again. I shook my head and pressed on, muttering to myself, it's nothing. Just fatigue. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. As I continued, the air around me grew colder. The night was closing in on the mountain, thick and oppressive, like a black velvet curtain pulling itself tight. My hands gripped the steering wheel more tightly than before, and my breath quickened. The road ahead seemed to stretch on forever, but no matter how far I drove, I couldn't shake the nagging sensation that I was caught in some kind of loop. I turned the corner again, and there it was. The same stretch of road, the same curve, the same trees. The same feeling of dread. This wasn't possible. I must have missed a turn. I checked my GPS, but there was no signal. Panic clawed at my chest, and my heart began to race. I turned around, trying to retrace my steps, but the road only repeated itself. No matter which direction I went, I was always back where I started. My knuckles were white as I gripped the wheel, and my breath came in shallow gasps. How was this happening? Why couldn't I escape? As the minutes ticked by, I started to notice something else. Shapes, distant and fleeting, in the shadows just off the road. At first, I thought it was the trees, or maybe my mind playing tricks on me, but the shapes were distinct, figures. Tall and thin, standing motionless at the edge of the road, barely visible in the darkness. I swallowed hard, not wanting to look. But my gaze was drawn to them, as if some invisible force were pulling my attention. They didn't move. They didn't even seem to breathe. And yet, I felt their presence, felt the weight of their eyes upon me. I looked away quickly, my foot pressing harder on the gas. I needed to get out of here. I turned another corner, more desperate now, but when I looked ahead, I saw something far worse. The road was gone. The cliffside that had been just to my left moments ago had vanished, replaced by an endless expanse of blackness. The trees were gone, too. There was only the narrow stretch of road beneath my tires, fading into the void of nothingness. A suffocating cold crept in through the cracks of my windows, and the figures were closer now, too close. They moved slowly, their limbs stretching unnaturally, their faces blank and hollow, voids where eyes should be. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. I could feel their intentions, feel the hunger in the air. The shadows they cast seemed to grow darker with each step they took. I slammed on the brakes, the car screeching as it came to a halt in the middle of the road. I had no choice now, I was surrounded. One of the figures stepped forward, its elongated limbs moving with a slow, deliberate grace. It came closer, its presence overwhelming, suffocating. It was inches from my window now, and I could see that there was no face, only a smooth, featureless surface where skin should have been. I couldn't breathe. My chest tightened, and I clutched the wheel, trying to will myself into action, but the fear had taken hold of me, paralyzing me. A voice, or what I assumed was a voice, echoed in my mind, low and resonant, like the sound of wind passing through a narrow tunnel. Asterisk, you cannot leave. The road does not let you leave, asterisk. I couldn't look away. I couldn't even blink. My eyes were locked on that figure's smooth, featureless face, its presence the very essence of dread. Please, just let me go, I whispered, my voice trembling. The figure didn't respond, but I saw the shadows behind it shift. There were more of them now, gathering in the darkness. Their eyes, if they even had them, were fixed on me, hollow, dark pits. They seemed to feed on my fear, growing larger, more grotesque. I tried to move, to back up, but the car wouldn't respond. It was as if the engine had stalled, as if the road itself had a hold on me, binding me in place. And then, I saw it. Far in the distance, beyond the figures and the darkness, I could make out a faint light, a distant beacon. A road sign, perhaps, or a street lamp, something that meant escape. I wasn't sure how far it was, but I had to reach it. I had to. With a sudden burst of panic-fueled adrenaline, I floored the gas pedal, the engine roaring to life. The figures scattered into the shadows as the car surged forward, faster than I'd ever driven before. My heart hammered in my chest, and I kept my eyes on that faint light, my only hope. But the road wouldn't let me go. I slammed the brakes again, the tires screeching as the road twisted and turned in impossible directions. The sign, the light, everything, it was gone. I was back on the same stretch of road, the same trees looming around me, the same figures standing just beyond the reach of my headlights. The road was endless. The figures were closing in. And the cold, suffocating presence of whatever controlled this place was growing stronger, like a dark hand squeezing the life from my chest. The road would never end. It was alive, and it would never let me leave. My hands trembled on the wheel, my heart pounding in my ears, a rhythmic thump that echoed the sound of the tires on the road. I kept driving, though I knew, deep down, there was no point. The figures, those grotesque shapes, had started to move closer again, their slow, deliberate steps bringing them nearer to the car with every passing second. I had nowhere to go. There was no escape. The realization hit me like a physical blow, knocking the wind from my lungs. I wasn't driving anymore. The road, the figures, the mountain, it had all become part of something bigger, something far older than I could understand. I was trapped here, caught in an endless cycle, forced to relive the same horror over and over. The shadows that surrounded me weren't just a product of the night, they were part of the road, part of whatever dark force had ensnared me. The figures reached the car, their long, thin hands pressing against the windows, their faceless masks staring in at me with empty voids. The cold seeped into the car now, chilling me to the bone. The air was thick with something ancient, with something hungry. And in that moment, I knew what they wanted. They weren't waiting for me to escape. They were waiting for me to accept that I couldn't. I turned the wheel in desperation, swerving the car wildly, but the road didn't change. The bends were no longer just turns of the road, they were loops in time, pulling me back to the same place over and over. A voice echoed in my head again, low and raspy, like a wind through hollow bones. Asterisk, you cannot leave. You were never meant to leave, asterisk. I slammed my hands against the dashboard, my eyes wild with panic, but the road wouldn't relent. The figures began to crowd around me, their faces still featureless, their bodies stretching and distorting, becoming something even darker, more monstrous. I could feel them now, in the car with me, their presence closing in. I wanted to scream, but no sound escaped. My chest tightened, and I couldn't breathe. My hands clutched the steering wheel, but I had no strength left to fight. The road had won. The world around me began to blur, the shadows growing darker, swallowing everything. The figures leaned closer, and I felt them in the very marrow of my bones, cold and ancient, dragging me deeper into the blackness. Then, nothing. The headlights flickered one last time, casting a fleeting glow over the road. The car slowed to a halt. The road was still there, stretching ahead of me, endless. And I was still driving. And I always would be. Trapped in the cycle. Forever. I had been driving for hours, the kind of drive that makes you question your own sanity, wondering if you're even headed in the right direction anymore. The miles stretched on in front of me, the road a monotonous blur, the gas gauge hovering dangerously close to empty. I wasn't supposed to be on this road, at least, I didn't think I was. But somehow, the GPS had failed, the map app had glitched, and I found myself far from anywhere familiar. The night was closing in, and the only light I could see came from the fading sun, casting long shadows over the barren landscape. It was then, when I was about to give in to the gnawing worry of being stranded, that I saw it, a gas station in the distance. I wasn't sure how far away it was, or how I'd even missed it up until then, but the flickering neon sign was a lifeline. I had to stop, no matter what. As I rolled up to the pump, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something wasn't right, that this wasn't the help I thought it would be. But I was too tired, too desperate to care. I just needed to fill up and get back on the road. The gas station was ancient, looking like it had been abandoned for years. The concrete was cracked, the walls of the building were peeling, and the rusted metal pumps creaked in the wind like forgotten sentinels. The neon sign above the door buzzed erratically, its dim light casting an eerie glow on everything around it. Yet, I could see that there was still life here. There was movement inside, the shape of someone moving in and out of the shadows. I pulled up to the nearest pump and hesitated for a moment. It wasn't a large station, but it seemed like it could be enough to help me get to the next town, wherever that was. The silence outside felt oppressive, like the world was holding its breath. I stepped out of the car, my shoes hitting the cracked pavement with a soft thud. The wind had picked up, carrying with it the smell of dust and decay. As I walked toward the building, the door creaked open on its own, as though welcoming me, or perhaps warning me to leave. A figure appeared in the doorway. The man was old, his face covered with deep lines, his eyes sunken but strangely sharp. He wore a stained, ragged uniform, the name tag long faded. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there, watching me. His gaze seemed to pierce right through me, making my skin crawl, but I was too exhausted to care. "Need gas?" he finally asked, his voice gravelly, like it hadn't been used in years. I nodded, trying to smile, though it felt forced. "Yes, please. My tank's nearly empty." Without a word, he moved to one of the pumps and started the fuel flow. I watched him closely as he worked, noticing how slow and deliberate his movements were. It almost seemed like he was too careful with the way he handled the nozzle. After a few minutes, the tank was full. The man didn't look up at me, but he muttered under his breath, "That'll be $250. My stomach dropped. What? That can't be right. The price at the pump says, "It's $250, he repeated, his voice a little firmer this time. I was taken aback. I hadn't even asked how much it would be before he started pumping. That's not possible. I was just on a normal highway, and gas didn't cost that much. There's no way." He cut me off with a sharp gesture, his hand held out expectantly. "The price is what it is. And that car of yours, it doesn't belong to you, does it?" I stared at him, my heart suddenly pounding in my chest. His words hung in the air, making no sense at all. "What do you mean?" "It's my car. I've had it for years." The man leaned in, his eyes glinting with something unsettling. "No. That car doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the one who came before you." I felt my breath catch in my throat. What was he talking about? I shook my head, trying to clear the fog that was clouding my thoughts. "I don't know what you're talking about. It's mine. I need to pay and get going." He didn't move. Instead, he stood there, watching me with an unervingly blank expression. "It's already been paid for. But you can't leave yet." I froze. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. "What do you mean, I can't leave?" I tried to back away, but my feet felt heavy, as if something was anchoring me to the ground. The man's smile twisted into something wrong, something far too wide for a normal person. "You've already paid the price. The road has chosen you." I reached for my wallet, hands shaking, ready to pull out whatever cash or card I could find. But when I looked at the pump again, something was off. The numbers on the display seemed to shift before my eyes, swirling like smoke in the air, and the ground beneath me felt unstable. My vision blurred. Before I could react, I turned to leave, but my car wasn't where I had parked it. The gas station itself seemed to warp, stretching and contorting like it was part of a nightmare. The road I had arrived on had vanished, replaced by a thick fog that clung to the air, obscuring everything in every direction. I couldn't see the road, the horizon, or even the sky, only the gas station, which had grown unrecognizable. I spun around, panic rising in my chest. What's happening? Where's my car? The attendant was gone. The gas pumps were now nothing more than twisted shapes, like the remnants of something that had once been real. The building itself had dissolved into the air, leaving behind only empty space and the sound of my frantic breathing. I ran back to where my car should have been, but it was gone, replaced by an endless stretch of cracked asphalt leading nowhere. The wind howled, cold and biting, and I felt it in my bones. It wasn't just the gas station that was vanishing, it was the whole world, warping around me. Where are you going? A voice whispered, a soft echo in the distance. I turned, my breath catching in my throat. There were shapes, figures now, standing just beyond the fog. I couldn't make out their features, but their eyes glimmered in the dim light, watching me. There were no roads, no signs, just an infinite expanse of nothingness. I tried to run, but my legs felt heavy, like I was moving through molasses. The figures began to draw closer, their whispers growing louder, louder, until it became deafening. The air was thick with their presence, pressing in from all sides. The world around me bent and twisted, the road I had once known disappearing into an endless void. The gas station, its flickering neon sign, was now just a distant memory, a nightmare I couldn't escape from. And then, from the depths of the void, I heard the voice again. This time, it wasn't a whisper, it was a cold, hollow laugh. Welcome to the road that never ends. The laughter echoed through the emptiness, a sound that seemed to stretch on forever, crawling under my skin. My heart hammered in my chest as I stumbled back, my feet slipping on the cracked asphalt. I felt as if I were falling through the ground, spinning, the world twisting around me, until everything blurred into a single, overwhelming sensation of dread. I called out, desperate for any answer, any sign that this was just some kind of dream. But the fog swallowed my voice, smothering it before it could reach the figures that hovered just out of reach, their eyes gleaming with an ancient knowledge that chilled me to my core. I couldn't see them clearly, but I felt them. They were everywhere, watching, waiting, their whispers curling around me like invisible chains. Every direction I turned led to more fog, more desolation, an infinite stretch of road that seemed to go on forever. There was no escape, no exit, no turning back. I collapsed to my knees, the cold air biting into my skin, my breath ragged in my chest. It felt as though the entire world had been erased, leaving only this place, a limbo of twisted reality and endless void. And then, through the haze, I heard it again, the faintest trace of the attendant's voice, as if he were right behind me, though I had no strength left to turn around. "You're here now," he said, his voice distant yet close, "and you'll never leave. Not until the road chooses someone else." My body trembled, my mind refusing to accept the truth. But deep down, I knew it. I was never meant to leave. The gas station, the twisted world, the figures, they were all part of something I couldn't understand, something that had claimed me. I was part of its endless cycle now, a passenger in a world that didn't make sense, trapped in a place that would never let me go. I looked out into the endless fog, hearing only the wind and the echoes of the voices that surrounded me. There was no car, no road, no hope left. I had become just another lost soul, another whisper on the wind. The road that never ends had claimed me, and I would wander it forever. We never should have taken that road. At the time, it seemed like a simple choice, a shortcut that would save us from hours of sitting in traffic, a quick detour that would lead us home faster. I had no reason to suspect anything was wrong. I never believed in ghost stories or old legends about haunted places. But now, as I sit here, cold and alone in the dark, I know that we should have trusted our instincts, turned around, and taken the long way home. It all started when we decided to take that old road. A road that, at first glance, seemed harmless, abandoned, and used, barely even a road anymore. Just a forgotten stretch of asphalt that time had left behind, veiled by trees and shadows. We were young, carefree, eager to get away from the endless sea of cars on the highway. But as night fell and the road stretched on longer than it should have, I began to feel uneasy. And when the car broke down, that's when things started to spiral. We had been driving for over an hour when the engine sputtered, sending a harsh, jarring sound through the car. Mark, who had been at the wheel, cursed under his breath. The vehicle lurched and then coasted to a stop. Silence descended. "I told you this car was too old," Sarah said, her voice sharp as she looked out the window at the growing darkness outside. "You sure we're not just out of gas?" Rachel asked, trying to sound optimistic. But even she couldn't hide the edge of fear in her voice. We all knew there was no cell service out here. The landscape was too isolated, too abandoned. For a moment, there was just the sound of the wind rustling through the trees and the faint creak of the old car's body. Mark attempted to start the engine again, but it only sputtered and died. "I'll go check under the hood," he said, stepping out of the car. I stared out at the shadows gathering in the woods, feeling the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. There was something wrong about the air tonight, thick and still, as if the world itself were holding its breath. Rachel, sensing the tension, gave me a tight smile. "It'll be fine. We'll figure it out. Worst case, we'll walk and find help." But as the minutes ticked by, the feeling of unease only grew. I looked out the side window and saw something in the distance, just beyond the tree line. A flicker of movement. It was subtle, but enough to catch my eye. A shadow, or perhaps a figure, standing in the woods. I blinked and it was gone. "Did you see that?" I asked, my voice low. "What?" Sarah looked up sharply. "That, in the woods. There was something moving." They all turned toward the dark forest, but nothing was visible now. Just the same dense trees, stretching endlessly into the gloom. "Probably just an animal," Rachel said, though her voice lacked conviction. "Right," I murmured, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone out there. Minutes passed, each one stretching longer than the last. Mark finally came back to the car, his face pale, frustration evident on his features. "Nothing. No way to fix it. The engine's shot. We're stuck." "So what now?" Sarah asked, her voice rising in panic. "We have to walk," Mark said, trying to sound confident. "There's a house a few miles up ahead. Maybe someone can help." I wanted to protest, to suggest we wait for help, but there was no arguing with Mark when he made up his mind. The four of us piled out of the car, bundled against the growing chill of the night air. We walked for what felt like an eternity, the dense woods closing in around us. The further we went, the darker it became. The trees loomed over us, their branches stretching like skeletal arms, blocking out what little light remained from the fading sun. The quiet was unnerving, nothing but the crunch of our footsteps on the dry leaves underfoot. Finally, after what seemed like hours, we saw it, a house, standing alone at the end of a long, winding path. Its silhouette was stark against the darkening sky. The windows were dark, the structure sagging in disrepair. It looked abandoned, but we had no choice. We needed shelter, and we needed it fast. The moment we stepped onto the porch, I felt it, the sense that something was wrong. The house didn't feel empty. It felt alive, as if it were watching us, waiting for us to come inside. "Should we go in?" Rachel asked, her voice trembling slightly. Mark pushed the door open, the creaking of the hinges loud in the stillness. We don't have much of a choice. We stepped into the entryway, the air thick with dust and the smell of mildew. The floorboards creaked beneath our feet, and the dark hallways stretched out before us like the maw of some monstrous creature. We started exploring, each of us drawn to different parts of the house. It was large, far larger than I expected, filled with old furniture draped in faded sheets, and an odd collection of trinkets and knickknacks. Everything was so still. It was as if time had stopped here, but the house itself had continued to live, breathing, watching, waiting. And then we found it, the photographs. At first, it seemed innocuous enough, just old family portraits lining the walls. But as we moved further in, I saw something that made my stomach drop. There, framed on the wall, was a photo of us, taken on a day I distinctly remembered. We had been out on a hike, laughing and joking around. But there was something wrong. We were standing at the edge of the forest, and behind us, just beyond the trees, was a shadow. A figure, lurking, watching. I backed away, my heart pounding in my chest. "Guys," I called out, my voice shaking. "You need to see this." The others gathered around as I pointed to the picture. Mark frowned, looking closer. "What the hell, that's us." I turned to look around the room, my breath catching in my throat. The house was full of pictures, and they were all of us, but not just from today. Some were from years ago, moments that we had no recollection of, places we had never been. I stumbled backwards, bumping into something behind me. I turned and found another photo, this one of me, alone, standing by the side of the road, my face pale, eyes wide with fear. But I'd never been there. I never remembered standing there. And then I realized, this wasn't a house filled with memories. It was a house that collected them. "We need to get out of here," Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. "Now." But as I turned to leave, I saw something in the corner of my eye, a figure, standing motionless in the hallway. It was tall, unnaturally thin, and dressed in tattered clothes. Its face was obscured, but there was something about its posture that felt wrong. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. My legs wouldn't move. The figure stepped forward, its feet making no sound against the floor. It didn't speak. It didn't need to. The air grew colder, and I felt something wash over me, as though a weight had pressed down on my chest, squeezing the air from my lungs. Suddenly, I was no longer alone. The walls seemed to pulse, and the shadows grew darker, deeper. The photographs on the walls began to shift, the faces in them twitching, distorting. And then, with a sickening clarity, I realized what had been happening, what was happening to us. We weren't just visitors. We weren't just passing through. We were part of it now. The house had been waiting for us, collecting our moments, our memories. And now, we would never leave. We would join the others who had come before us, frozen forever in time, just another set of faces in the endless collection. The figure reached out, its fingers impossibly long, and I felt its cold touch on my arm. The darkness closed in, and I knew with certainty that I would never see the light of day again. The house had claimed us. And now, it would never let us go. The darkness closed around me, smothering the last remnants of light. My breath came in shallow gasps, and my heartbeat thudded in my chest like a frantic drum, but there was no escape. The figure's cold fingers wrapped around my arm, its grip tightening like an iron vice, and I felt myself pulled forward, as if the house itself were swallowing me whole. I tried to scream, to fight back, but my body refused to obey. My legs felt like they were made of stone, rooted to the ground, and my mind was swirling in a fog of terror. I could hear my friends calling my name from the shadows, but their voices seemed distant, fading with every passing second. As I struggled, the house seemed to come alive. The floor beneath me groaned, the walls shifted, and the air grew colder, heavier. The photographs on the walls shifted again, their faces now twisted and distorted, morphing into something unrecognizable. It was as if the house was feeding off our fear, drawing us deeper into its nightmare. We were no longer visitors. We were part of its story, trapped in its endless cycle of time. The figure leaned in closer, its face still obscured, but I could feel its presence, like a suffocating weight, a shadow that stretched and grew until it filled every corner of my mind. I could feel it, watching me, studying me. It knew me. It knew us. And then, as if in some horrible, twisted gesture of finality, the figure released its grip. I stumbled backward, falling to the floor. But before I could rise, something in the air shifted, and I saw it, the moment. The photographs that lined the walls suddenly flashed before my eyes. They weren't just pictures. They were memories. My memories. The moments I had long since forgotten, the places I had been, the people I had known, the times I had lived. But there was something missing. Something crucial. The present. The now. The faces of my friends were there, too, but they were fading, slipping away like ghosts in the fog. And then it hit me, with sickening clarity. We were becoming part of the collection. Our faces, our lives, our very essence were being pulled from us, trapped in the frames, frozen in time. The house didn't just watch. It took. It took everything. And once it had you, you were never truly gone. You became another piece of its dark, twisted puzzle, another face staring out from the shadows, waiting for the next group of unsuspecting souls to come in. I tried to scream, but the sound didn't come. The last thing I saw was my own face, distorted and trapped in a photograph, staring back at me with empty, hollow eyes. And then everything went dark. I was no longer part of the world. I was no longer part of time. I was part of the house. And now, like the others before us, we wait. We wait for the next group to wander down the old road, to stumble into the house, to become the newest additions to its collection. The faces in the photographs. The memories trapped forever. We wait for them to come. And when they do, we'll be there. Watching. I had been driving for hours, the road stretching out before me like an endless black ribbon. The weight of the night seemed to settle into my bones, my eyelids growing heavier with every mile. I'd been hauling freight across states, and fatigue was starting to take its toll. I knew I needed to stop, to rest for a while, but I couldn't shake the nagging thought that maybe I should push through. Still, the temptation of a warm meal and a fresh cup of coffee won out. I spotted a rest stop in the distance, a sign barely visible under the faint glow of the flickering lights. It looked like the perfect place to take a quick break. Maybe the diner inside would have a hot plate of food waiting for me, or at least a steaming pot of coffee. I pulled off the highway, the gravel crunching beneath my tires as I made my way into the parking lot. What I didn't expect was the eerie stillness that greeted me. It was strange, unsettling, like the whole place had been abandoned in the middle of the night. The parking lot was nearly empty, with only a few vehicles parked at odd angles, their engines cold. I got out of the truck, my boots hitting the pavement with a dull thud, and headed toward the diner. The sign above flickered weakly, and I noticed that the neon glow of the open sign had long since faded. Still, I told myself it was nothing. The place was open enough, at least for a quick coffee. As I approached the door, something about the air felt wrong. The temperature had dropped sharply, and there was a strange, almost metallic taste in the air. I shook my head, trying to shake off the growing unease. It was just my tired mind playing tricks on me. The door creaked loudly as I pushed it open, the sound cutting through the silence like a scream. The diner was eerily still, the lights flickering overhead. The smell of burnt toast and stale coffee lingered in the air. It was the kind of place that looked stuck in time, faded booths, cracked vinyl seats, and chipped tables that hadn't seen a good cleaning in years. But the oddest thing was the absence of people. Not a soul in sight. "Hello," I called, my voice echoing through the empty diner. No response. I stepped inside, my boots scraping against the dirty floor as I made my way to an empty booth. I slid into the seat and looked around, but there was no sign of the usual diner staff. No waitress, no cook, not even a trucker in the corner booth nursing a cup of coffee. The coffee machine sat on the counter, the pot half full, steam rising from it as if it had just been made. I blinked, confused. How was it still warm? On the counter, the register stood open, its drawers slightly ajar, bills scattered across it like someone had left in a hurry. Plates of food sat untouched on the tables, their contents congealing and growing cold. I frowned. This wasn't right. The place felt like it had been frozen in time, like everyone had disappeared in an instant. I glanced back at the door, half expecting someone to walk in, but it remained quiet. Maybe I was the only one stupid enough to stop here at this hour. But there was no denying the strange sensation creeping up my spine, that prickling feeling of being watched. I sat there for a few minutes, waiting, trying to shake off the strange feeling gnawing at me. My eyes kept drifting back to the half-eaten meals on the tables. It almost felt like I had walked into a scene frozen in time, like the whole place had been abandoned mid-shift. The air was thick with silence, except for the occasional hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. I had just started to wonder if the place had really been closed for days when a noise came from the hallway leading to the restrooms. It was faint at first, just a soft scrape, like something dragging across the floor. I froze, my heart racing. Then, a whisper. Low and raspy, like it was coming from just behind the door. I stood, cautiously stepping toward the hallway. My boots echoed through the diner, breaking the silence. I peered down the dark corridor leading to the restrooms, but all I could see were shadows. The air was thick, heavier than it should have been. It felt suffocating. The noise came again, a scraping sound, followed by a muffled whisper. "Get out." My blood ran cold. I stepped back, almost stumbling, but something compelled me to keep going. Was I imagining things? I was tired. Maybe the exhaustion was finally catching up to me. I'd been on the road too long. I turned toward the restrooms, half expecting to find a broken pipe or some other explanation, but as I reached the door, the faint message scrawled on the cracked mirror made me stop dead in my tracks. "Leave before the sun comes up." My breath caught in my throat. I blinked, rubbing my eyes. The words were smudged, like they had been written hastily in dirt or grime, but they were unmistakable. My pulse quickened, a cold sweat breaking out along my spine. "Hello," I called out, my voice unsteady. "Is anyone there?" No response. Just the sound of my own heartbeat hammering in my ears. Then, without warning, the door to the restroom creaked open on its own. I stiffened, staring into the dark void beyond it. The scraping noise returned, but this time it was accompanied by a low, guttural growl that made my skin crawl. I wanted to turn and run. I knew I should, but something kept me rooted to the spot. Something dark in that restroom seemed to reach out to me, beckoning. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't help it. I dared a glance at the mirror again. And that's when I saw it. Another message. This time, it wasn't written in dirt. It was smeared across the glass, as though something had pressed its fingers against it. You should not have come. I staggered back, nearly falling over my own feet, my mind racing. I had to get out. I turned toward the door to the diner, but it wouldn't open. It was stuck. My heart skipped a beat as I tried again, pulling and pushing on the handle, but it was like it was sealed shut from the other side. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, now echoing through the diner. Leave. Leave now. I could feel the temperature dropping. A freezing chill swept over me, like the air itself had turned to ice. My breath fogged in front of me, and the low growls from the restroom intensified, as though someone, was coming closer. I glanced around desperately, but the diner was empty. The figures outside the windows hadn't been there before, but now, I could see them, dark shapes, lurking just beyond the glass, their hollow eyes staring at me, unmoving. Silent. I gasped as one of the figures moved, slowly, toward the door. I ran. I didn't even know where I was going. I just needed to get out. But as I reached the door, a figure appeared before me, its form blurry and shifting. It wasn't human. Its body was elongated, twisted. Its face. I didn't want to see its face. I didn't want to look. But I couldn't look away. The door slammed open on its own, and I was outside, gasping for air. I didn't stop running until I was back in my truck, hands shaking as I started the engine. My eyes flicked to the diner one last time as I peeled out of the parking lot. The sun was just beginning to rise, but the rest stop stayed dark. Cold. I didn't look back. But I could still hear the whispers, soft, persistent, warning me. You shouldn't have come. I didn't look back as I drove away, my foot pressing harder on the gas pedal, as if the act of speeding away might somehow outrun the terror I'd just experienced. The headlights of my truck cut through the dark, but the rest stop faded behind me, swallowed by the night. I tried to steady my breath, to make sense of what had just happened, but the image of those hollow eyes, the oppressive silence, and the whispers that still echoed in my mind, leave before the sun comes up, you should not have come, refused to leave me. By the time I hit the next town, the sun had started to creep over the horizon, casting a pale light across the landscape. I pulled into a gas station and parked, my hands still trembling. I needed to shake the feeling of being watched, of having something dark and unseen following me. I forced myself to get out, my legs unsteady as I filled up my tank. But my eyes kept darting to the rearview mirror, to the empty road behind me. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, was still there, lurking in the shadows. As I finished up and climbed back into the truck, I caught a glimpse of something on the side of the station, just beyond the flickering lights. I froze. There, in the dirty window of a nearby building, was a reflection I hadn't expected. The diner. But it wasn't just the diner, there were people there, standing in the windows. Faces, pale, lifeless, staring right at me. The air turned cold again, and I slammed the door shut, my heart pounding as I sped off, not daring to look back this time. I've never passed that rest stop again, and I don't think I ever will. I don't care if it's the only place for miles. No amount of exhaustion or road fatigue is worth the terror that waits there. And yet, in the back of my mind, I still hear the whispers sometimes, just as clear as before. Leave before the sun comes up. You should not have come. I've always been a night owl, but I had never driven so late through an area like this. It was a route I'd taken before, but tonight felt different. The air was thick with an unsettling quiet, and the headlights of my car seemed to barely slice through the fog that hung heavy over the road. I was heading home after an exhausting day, and though I was tired, I didn't think twice about the seemingly empty stretch of highway. The road was long and winding, stretching into darkness with no signs of life, just a few trees and the occasional worn-out billboard. At first, the stillness didn't bother me, until it did. That's when it started. I noticed the car behind me at first, the faint glow of headlights just visible in my rearview mirror. It was strange. The car didn't seem to be moving at a normal pace, almost as if it were waiting for something. I shrugged it off, thinking it was just another traveler on the same lonely road. But as the miles ticked on, I realized it wasn't just following me. It was closing in. Faster. Closer. It was tailgating me. That's when the dread began to settle in, creeping slowly under my skin, as I tried to keep my speed steady, hoping the other driver would move on. But they didn't. The headlights grew brighter, now glaring through my mirror like twin searchlights, their glow casting eerie shadows on the side of the road. I could feel the pressure mounting, a sense of unease pressing down on me like a weight on my chest. It didn't make sense. There was no reason for someone to be this close, especially on such a desolate stretch of highway. I glanced at the rearview again, my pulse quickening. I could barely make out the shape of the car behind me. The windows were so dark, I couldn't tell if there was anyone inside. The longer I looked, the more unnerving it became. It wasn't just following anymore, it was stalking. Almost like it was aware of me. I tightened my grip on the wheel, my knuckles turning white, as I pushed my foot down harder on the gas. I tried to shake the feeling, but it lingered, gnawing at me like something just out of reach, a vague memory that I couldn't quite place. The other car mirrored my movements, speeding up when I did, closing the gap with every passing second. I couldn't help but glance in my side mirror, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I saw something, no, someone, in the darkened window. A shape, shifting, as though they were watching me. My breath hitched. I couldn't ignore it anymore. My heart began to pound in my chest as panic set in. Asterisk, who is this person? Why are they following me? Asterisk, every time I glanced behind me, the car was right there, too close, the headlights now so bright I couldn't see the road ahead clearly. I tried to force myself to focus, but the intensity of it all felt suffocating. I wasn't sure if I was being paranoid or if I was in real danger. But something told me that if I didn't do something soon, it wouldn't end well. I floored the accelerator, pushing my car faster. The engine roared to life, and for a moment, it felt like I might escape. But just as I thought I had gained a little ground, the car behind me surged forward, cutting across my rear bumper, swerving dangerously close. My heart skipped a beat. What the hell was going on? I swerved, my tires screeching against the asphalt, narrowly avoiding a collision. My hands were shaking now, beads of sweat dripping down my face. In one swift motion, the car behind me pulled alongside and then ahead. My heart was hammering in my chest, but I had no choice but to keep driving. Then, without warning, the other car slammed on its brakes. I barely had time to react before the car came to an abrupt stop directly in front of mine. The force of it threw me forward, my seatbelt jerking tightly against my chest. For a few moments, I sat frozen, staring at the brake lights, my breath shallow and quick. What was going on? Who would do something like this? I stared at the car ahead of me, heart racing in my ears. This was a bad idea. A terrible idea. But the fear inside me was now so overwhelming that I couldn't stay in the car any longer. My legs were shaking as I slowly unbuckled my seatbelt and opened the door. The night air hit me like a cold slap to the face, my breath forming little clouds in the chilled darkness. The other car was still sitting there, unmoving. The tension in the air felt like static, prickling the hairs on the back of my neck. My hands trembled as I walked toward it, feeling every nerve in my body screaming at me to turn around, to run, to get out of there. But I couldn't. Something in the pit of my stomach told me I needed to know what was going on. What kind of person would do this? What did they want from me? As I reached the other car, the door slowly creaked open. A figure stepped out, tall, with long, ragged dark hair and an aura of something wrong. But it wasn't the figure itself that stopped me in my tracks, it was the eyes. The eyes. I couldn't describe them at first, not with words. There was something about them that was so unnatural, so terrifying. They were black, all black. There were no whites, no pupils, no life. Just the deep, endless void of nothing. I froze, my blood turning to ice. The figure tilted its head as if inspecting me, its expression unreadable. It didn't speak, didn't move, but the air grew heavier, pressing in on me, suffocating me. I wanted to run, to scream, but my legs wouldn't obey. The creature, if that's what it was, slowly extended one hand toward me. Its fingers were long and pale, stretching out with an almost hypnotic pull. "Follow," it seemed to whisper, although no sound passed its lips. The words were in my mind, echoing like a dark command. My body trembled. Follow, what the hell did that mean? My instincts screamed at me to run, but my feet refused to move. The figure's hand beckoned me, once, twice. There was no rational explanation for what was happening, and yet, I could feel it, something was pulling me toward it. That voice in my head, urging me to follow. I could feel the cold, empty gaze of those black eyes burrowing into me. Do not follow, I told myself. Asterisk, turn around. Get in your car and drive away, asterisk. But something about the figure's presence made me want to obey. I had no control over it. I took a step forward. Then another. The black-eyed figure stood motionless, waiting, watching, as if it had all the time in the world. My body was no longer mine. My feet shuffled closer, each step heavier than the last, as though the ground beneath me was turning to quicksand. I don't know how long I stood there, paralyzed, but suddenly, a jolt of clarity struck me. I wasn't going to be another victim. Not tonight. I forced myself to turn around, my legs suddenly working again as I sprinted toward my car, my breath ragged and my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. I threw the door open, slammed it shut, and started the engine. The car roared to life beneath me, and without a second thought, I tore down the road. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I didn't stop until I reached the town, my hands still trembling on the wheel. I drove through its dimly lit streets, not daring to pull over until I felt the sting of the cold air from a passing breeze. Only then did I glance in the rearview mirror. The road behind me was empty. But I knew it wasn't over. Not really. That figure, the black-eyed driver, was still out there, somewhere, waiting. And sooner or later, I would be forced to follow. I didn't stop after reaching the town. My hands were still shaking, and my mind raced in circles, desperately trying to make sense of what had just happened. The foggy streets and dim streetlights felt like a cruel illusion, offering no comfort, no sense of safety. I pulled into a parking lot, the engine still running, and stared blankly at the dashboard, trying to calm my breathing. It was just a crazy person, I told myself. Asterisk, a prank. A sick joke, asterisk. But I couldn't shake the memory of those eyes, those black, soulless eyes. I could still see them, hovering behind my eyelids like some dark stain, an image burned into my mind. I tried to rationalize it. It had to be some kind of trick, a bizarre, terrifying coincidence. The more I tried to push it away, the more it clawed its way to the surface, gnawing at my sanity. The night felt wrong, unnatural, like something was watching me, waiting. But I couldn't just sit there forever. I needed to get back home, to somewhere. As I drove out of the parking lot, I found myself checking the rearview mirror every few seconds, the gnawing feeling returning with each passing moment. It was there. In the reflection, the headlights of another car were just visible, too far behind to make out any details, but unmistakable in their intensity. It wasn't unusual for a car to follow you on a quiet road, but the sensation was different now. The figure, the black eyes, had left its mark on my mind. It was as if the presence was still there, lingering just behind me, too close for comfort. I accelerated, forcing my car faster down the road. Every turn I made felt like I was being led towards something, but what? I couldn't let myself think about it. If I didn't look back, if I didn't acknowledge the possibility of something being there, then maybe, just maybe, I could escape it. Then, in the dimness of the rearview mirror, I saw something that made my stomach drop. The car that had been behind me earlier was no longer behind me at all. It was in front of me now, further down the road, stationary at an intersection. The headlights gleamed like twin orbs in the distance. I couldn't tell if it was the same car, if it was even the same driver. But I knew, deep down, that it was. The black-eyed figure was waiting. I slammed the brakes, my heart skipping as my body tensed in horror. What did it want from me? The black eyes flashed in my mind, the silent beckoning, follow. I couldn't stop, not this time. I had to know. Or maybe I was too afraid to turn back. Either way, I wasn't ready to face it. Not yet. But as I drove past, I caught a glimpse of something in the rearview. The figure was standing at the side of the road now, watching me. It was still beckoning. And though my hands shook, I felt myself drifting toward it. Whether I wanted to or not. Because in the end, I knew I had no choice. I would have to follow. It was supposed to be a simple drive. A quiet getaway, a peaceful night out of the city. Mark and I had been looking forward to it for weeks, a chance to escape the noise of our lives, to feel the freedom of open roads. We'd packed a small bag, thrown some snacks into the back seat, and headed off for a remote cabin up in the mountains. It was supposed to be the perfect escape, just the two of us, a break from the grind. The evening had started beautifully. The sunset had painted the sky with deep oranges and purples, and the road was clear, winding through forests and hills. We sang along to the radio, laughed about silly things, and didn't think twice about the miles we were putting behind us. But as the hours passed, and the miles stretched on, a creeping sense of unease settled in. The road had grown more desolate, the trees thicker, the darkness deeper. The air felt heavier, colder. And as much as I tried to shake the feeling, I couldn't deny it, something wasn't right. Something was off. We hadn't planned for anything to go wrong. We hadn't planned for the car. The car that wouldn't stop. I glanced over at Mark. His face was illuminated by the glow of the dashboard, but his expression was taut, focused. He'd been quiet for a while, eyes darting between the road and the rearview mirror. It was subtle at first, just a feeling I couldn't shake, but as we continued down the winding highway, I noticed something strange. "We're being followed," I said, breaking the silence. My voice sounded more nervous than I intended. Mark shifted in his seat, but didn't say anything right away. His eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, and for a long moment, he didn't speak. Then he said, "It's probably nothing. Just another car out here." But as I turned to look, I saw it. The headlights in the rearview mirror. They were too bright, too constant. The car behind us hadn't passed us. It was too close. I could barely make out the outline of the vehicle, but it seemed to be matching our speed, never getting closer, but never falling behind. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "Mark, it's been like this for a while. What if they're following us?" Mark shot me a reassuring smile, but his hands tightened around the steering wheel. "You're overthinking it. It's a quiet road. I'm sure they're just going the same way." But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. We were in the middle of nowhere, no lights, no signs of civilization. Just the two of us, surrounded by trees and darkness, with the car behind us steadily gaining on us. I stared at the headlights in the rearview mirror, trying to steady my breath. "Maybe we should pull over, let them pass," I suggested. Mark didn't respond. He just kept driving, faster now, as though he were trying to outpace the car behind us. The engine hummed louder as we sped up, but the car behind us seemed to keep pace, perfectly synchronized. No matter how fast we went, no matter what direction we turned, it never wavered. It was like it was tethered to us, following us, always there, lurking in the distance. I felt my pulse quicken, a tight knot forming in my stomach. "Mark, this isn't normal." He shot me a quick glance. His jaw was clenched. I know. But I think we're just being paranoid. We're fine." But I wasn't convinced. I could feel my anxiety building with every passing mile. The road ahead stretched on, empty and dark. Mark suddenly swerved to the left, taking an unmarked turn, but the car behind us followed, no hesitation, no delay. It was almost as though it had anticipated our every move. "This is insane," I whispered to myself, but Mark must have heard. He cursed under his breath, taking another sharp turn, this time more aggressively, as if trying to shake the car. But it stayed right on our tail. I couldn't sit still any longer. I had to know. I opened my door, prepared to step out. "I'm going to talk to them," I said, barely able to control the fear rising in my chest. "Don't, Claire, please," Mark begged, but it was too late. I was already stepping into the cold night air, my breath fogging in the chill. The car's engine rumbled quietly behind us. I could feel the weight of its presence, almost palpable. The headlights were blinding, and I had to squint as I walked toward it. Every step felt heavy, as though the earth beneath me was pulling me deeper into the night. The hair on the back of my neck stood up as I neared the car. The darkness around me seemed to deepen, the shadows stretching unnaturally. I reached for the door handle, heart hammering in my chest. As my fingers touched it, the door swung open suddenly. I jumped back, my breath caught in my throat. A figure stepped out of the car, a woman. She was pale, her face drawn, with dark circles under her eyes. She wore a tattered white dress, the fabric torn in places, as if she had been wandering through the wilderness for days. Her hair was disheveled, wild strands framing her face, and her eyes were wide, unblinking. She didn't speak. She just pointed at our car. I turned, confused, my heart racing. Mark was still sitting in the driver's seat, his hands gripping the wheel, his face pale. I looked back at the woman, but she was gone. Vanished. I spun around, my breath catching in my throat, but the car, her car, was gone as well. I didn't understand. My mind couldn't process what had just happened. Then I heard Mark's voice from behind me, trembling. "Claire, What did you see? I turned toward him, my eyes wide. I felt as though the ground beneath me had shifted. The car, our car, was still there. But something was different. I stepped back, stumbling. Mark, look. In the back seat. He followed my gaze, his face a mask of confusion. But when his eyes landed on the rearview mirror, his expression faltered. In the back seat of our car, where no one had been sitting before, there was a figure. A face, my face, staring back at us, its eyes wide with terror. The mouth was open, but no sound came out. It was me. It was a distorted version of me. I turned back to Mark, but he didn't move. His face was pale, his hands shaking. What is this? I didn't have an answer. My mind was reeling. We never left, Mark. We never made it out. Before I could finish, the headlights of the mysterious car flickered in the distance again. My heart dropped. The chase had never stopped. The road had never ended. The truth slammed into me, a weight I could barely bear. We had been dead all along. The crash that we thought was a minor fender bender had taken us from this world. We hadn't escaped the road. We were trapped on it, forever. And the car that had been following us? It was us. Chasing ourselves. I turned back to the rearview mirror, but my reflection wasn't mine anymore. It was the version of me, the one I had seen in the back seat. The figure that had been chasing us. And as the headlights drew nearer, I understood, this would never stop. We were stuck, trapped in this never-ending nightmare. The car wouldn't stop. And neither would we. The car that won't stop. It was supposed to be a simple drive. A quiet getaway, a peaceful night out of the city. Mark and I had been looking forward to it for weeks, a chance to escape the noise of our lives, to feel the freedom of open roads. We'd packed a small bag, thrown some snacks into the back seat, and headed off for a remote cabin up in the mountains. It was supposed to be the perfect escape, just the two of us, a break from the grind. The evening had started beautifully. The sunset had painted the sky with deep oranges and purples, and the road was clear, winding through forests and hills. We sang along to the radio, laughed about silly things, and didn't think twice about the miles we were putting behind us. But as the hours passed, and the miles stretched on, a creeping sense of unease settled in. The road had grown more desolate, the trees thicker, the darkness deeper. The air felt heavier, colder. And as much as I tried to shake the feeling, I couldn't deny it, something wasn't right. Something was off. We hadn't planned for anything to go wrong. We hadn't planned for the car. The car that wouldn't stop. I glanced over at Mark. His face was illuminated by the glow of the dashboard, but his expression was taut, focused. He'd been quiet for a while, eyes darting between the road and the rearview mirror. It was subtle at first, just a feeling I couldn't shake, but as we continued down the winding highway, I noticed something strange. "We're being followed," I said, breaking the silence. My voice sounded more nervous than I intended. Mark shifted in his seat, but didn't say anything right away. His eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, and for a long moment, he didn't speak. Then he said, "It's probably nothing. Just another car out here." But as I turned to look, I saw it. The headlights in the rearview mirror. They were too bright, too constant. The car behind us hadn't passed us. It was too close. I could barely make out the outline of the vehicle, but it seemed to be matching our speed, never getting closer, but never falling behind. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "Mark, it's been like this for a while. What if they're following us?" Mark shot me a reassuring smile, but his hands tightened around the steering wheel. "You're overthinking it. It's a quiet road. I'm sure they're just going the same way." But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. We were in the middle of nowhere, no lights, no signs of civilization. Just the two of us, surrounded by trees and darkness, with the car behind us steadily gaining on us. I stared at the headlights in the rearview mirror, trying to steady my breath. "Maybe we should pull over, let them pass," I suggested. Mark didn't respond. He just kept driving, faster now, as though he were trying to outpace the car behind us. The engine hummed louder as we sped.